OnPhotonSerializeView is best used for values that will change frequently that you want synced up over the network. There are some settings that directly affect the OnPhotonSerializeView option. I'm going to demonstrate those inside the test connect script, and these can be configured before you even connect the Photon. You have two settings which can help synchronize values better. You have the send rate and the serialize rate. So first you have Photon network.sendRate. I'm going to set this to 40, and by default it's 20. You have Photon network.serializeRate, and I'm going to set this also to 40, and by default it's 10. I'm going to tell you to start, this is a really bad idea. 40 is how many packets a player can send per second. It's not per photon view, it's all in all per second. 20 is generally enough. 40 is high, but you can probably get away with it. The real problem comes with this, serialization rate. I mentioned before that OnPhotonSerializeView is typically good for synchronizing things that need to be updated regularly, like the transform position, rotation, or whatever it may be. Now, in the editor, I've shown you that there is a Photon transform view which does it automatically for you. However, behind the scenes, it's actually using the serialization rate. So what that means for you is if you change this to 40, it is sending that data 40 times a second per OnPhotonSerializeView rate, which means it is going to cap out your send rate immediately. You'll get a ton of lag. That's why this value is lower than the send rate, because you want to have your Photon views kind of spread out the data as it's sent and try to keep to the most of your send rate without really clogging it up. So what happens if I reduce the serialization rate? Let's go ahead and change this to 5 and change the send rate back to the default of 20. So I have the serialization rate sending half as quick as it normally does. This means your position updates and your animator updates and anything else that uses OnPhotonSerializeView is going to be updating half as fast. I made a build with these settings, created and joined a room, and I'm just going to show you what it looks like. You can see that the transform on the left in the client or the Unity player is jumping around a lot more than it used to. This is because, as said before, the data is sending at 5 times per second rather than 10, so it's not receiving as many updates and it's not able to translate the movement as smoothly. If you have slow moving objects in your game, you can probably get away with a slower update rate. Also, as an alternative, you could get rid of the Photon transform view and replace it with the transform view classic, and raise the teleport speed slightly, and then change the option to interpolate to estimated. And I find this works a lot better than the new Photon transform view. And don't forget to drop it into the observed components. I have another build up with the Photon transform view classic, and you can see it's still behind more than it was when you had 10 as the serialization rate, but it's a lot more smooth and it's doing a lot better than the newer transform view. So again, if you have units that don't move too quick, you could probably get away with sending less data. Now let's talk about how to actually use the OnPhotonSerializeView method. I'm going to go back to Visual Studio, and I'm going to go to my simple object mover script. To utilize the method, we have to implement the interface. So let's go up to the top, and at the end of monobehavior pun, comma, I pun observable, and then control period if in Visual Studio, and then implement interface. And you'll see that right here I have public void OnPhotonSerializeView. I talked about how using the serialization rate controls how often that this method is called. So 5 times a second is what it is currently set to, which means OnPhotonSerializeView will call approximately every 200 milliseconds. So you have 2 parameters. You have stream and info. Info is information about the player, which is the view is 4. So you have the Photon view, which is a reference to the component, and then the sender, which is a player. And then you have Photon stream, which is used to read and write the data. Either as the owner, you would write the data, or As the non-owner, so the other players, you would receive the data and do whatever you like with it. To show you how it works, we're going to update the transform position over the network. Normally you'd probably just use a Photon transform view or view classic to do so, but just to get an idea of how this works, I'm going to go ahead and do this manually. So first I need to see if I'm writing or reading. Remember, the owner is writing and the other clients are reading. So if stream dot is writing, which would indicate that you are the owner, else if stream dot is reading, which means you're a client and you're looking to update the value. So for is writing, I'm going to do stream dot send next transform dot position, and then for is reading, I'm going to do transform dot position equals vector 3, because you must cast to the type stream dot receive next. So this will send my transform's position whenever this method is called if I'm the owner of it, and this will receive it if I'm another client. Keep in mind, as mentioned, you must always cast to the type you're receiving because it doesn't know what the type is offhand. Also, whichever order you send in, you must receive in as well. So if I was to also send, say, the transform.rotation, I would apply the rotation right here after I applied to position. So now I'm going to go back to Unity. I'm going to have my cube prefab open, which is already up. And I'm just going to go ahead and disable the Photon Transform View Classic for now. And then I'm going to take my simple object mover script and drag it into the observed components, replacing the Photon Transform View Classic. So I have a build up here. Now I'm going to move my little cube around, and you notice it's just snapping to the positions. That's because I don't have any kind of estimated speed, lerping, or any of that set up. It's just setting the position and then setting position on the other clients as well. So this indicates that the OnSerializeView is working. I'm not going to keep the script or the code that I just wrote. So I'm actually going to go back to the cube prefab, re-enable the Photon Transform View Classic, and then drag that into observed components over the simple object mover. Then I'm going to go back to my simple object mover script, and I'm just going to wipe out the OnPhotonSerializeView. Actually, I'll keep it around, but I'm going to comment it out just so that I know that it's not running. And keep in mind, as said before, if you have the observe option set to unreliable on change under your Photon view, that data is only sent whenever the values change. Things you might sync up could be perhaps a unit's health, or maybe which direction they're aiming at if you're using IK, something that's unique to bones rather than transforms to where you couldn't use the Photon Transform View, or anything that you don't want to add a specific component for and you want to update as variables.